Welcome to everyone, and a special welcome to one of our presenters, Dr. Walker, and we will formally introduce everyone shortly. This event is sponsored by the UN NGO Committee on the Family, New York, and our topic for today is Family Impact, the role of the family in the impact for the future and beyond. My name is Marcia Barlow, and I co-chair the committee along with Vinnie Santoro, who's with us. Other members of the executive committee include Ben Freer, Elizabeth Delgado, Ryan Coe, who has another commitment, Lynn Walsh, and Rachana Chin, who are both with us. We'd like to also note with sadness the passing of our colleague Marilyn Kanelski and acknowledge all of the work that she did on behalf of families. She will be missed. We always like to share the mission of the NGO Committee on the Family. It is to advocate for the inclusion of the family in international resolutions, policies, and programs within the UN system. And you can see more of the committee's work on our website, which is ngofamilynewyork.org. Again, that's ngofamilynewyork.org. And also, we would like to note, right now, we're in the middle of a membership drive, and ask you to please consider becoming a member of the NGO Committee on the Family. And you can go to that same website, ngofamilynewyork.org, and you'll see the join button up in the top toolbar, and that will provide you with the details. And we would definitely enjoy, love, and appreciate your support and engagement with us. So just wanted to make you also aware, so you can mark your calendar for next month's activity and event. It will be on November 14th, and the topic is Responsible Parents, Responsible Children, Celebrating the Rights of the Child. And again, mark your calendar for November 14th at the same time. Before we go forward, just wanted to review a few housekeeping items, let you know that this event is being recorded and the video is posted on our website a few days after our program. And that provides you with an opportunity to review what this event and these marvelous speakers, as well as share it with others. Also, in an effort to keep background noise to amendment, please mute yourself until we begin the Q&A section. That would be fabulous. You can, however, post any of your questions or comments into the chat, and we will get to those questions during that Q&A section. So I am now going to turn the time over to my colleague, Ben Freer, who will moderate our program and introduce our speakers. Ben, you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction to the event and to the NGO Committee on the Family. We are really thrilled to have two excellent speakers today for our event, Dr. Susan Walker, who I will intro shortly, and Dr. Kara Alamo, who I will introduce when it is her time to speak. Before we get to that, today's event is the Family's Impact, the role of the family in the Pact for the Future and Beyond. And so really importantly, I won't read the entire concept note that you received, but I think really importantly, the goal for the Pact for the Future is to protect the needs and interests of the present and future generations through the actions in this Pact for the Future. The Pact commits to 56 actions in the areas of sustainable development, and those include emphasis on technology and innovation and digital cooperation, with special emphasis on youth and future generations. And so really importantly, when we're thinking about what it is that we're doing in protecting and supporting families, the Pact for the Future goes on to reference the importance of implementing family-friendly and family-oriented policies that support the social and economic development of children and young people so that they can reach their full potential and enjoy their human rights, as well as the promotion of intergenerational solidarity, as well as intergenerational dialogue and social cohesion is an indispensable part of the foundation for the prosperity of future generations. And in this regard, the role of families and family-friendly and family-oriented policies as contributors to sustainable development must be recognized. And for those of you who have been involved in the NGO Committee on the Family or just family-related policies at the United Nations, you know how difficult it was to get those references to the family in the Pact for the Future. Family is often a difficult term to be used in UN circles because of issues with definition of how we think of family and other factors. And so I think it's a really great indication of the UN's recognition of the importance of the family in shaping global policy in the future, that we're going to include family as a meaningful component as to the way that we support all people throughout our societies and community. So with that, I am thrilled to welcome someone I consider a friend and a great colleague and just wonderful human being, Dr. Susan Walker, who joined the University of Minnesota faculty in 2007, retired in 2023. She authored the textbook Critical Perspectives on Technology and the Family that is used in undergraduate courses, but I must say is a wonderful resource for anyone interested in how technology can be related to the family. It's really accessible, and potentially one of the greatest contributions that she was willing to do is that it's a free open source textbook, right? And so really wonderful of her. Her research focuses on social context influences on parenting and technology and family life, parent learning and technology integration. Her parenting and family education, educators' integration of technology and practice, especially during COVID-19, allowed for the creation of a virtual community of practice for weekly engagement for parenting and early childhood education professionals. She also led the Parentopia project that created a web-based application to complement parent learning and engagement in Minnesota's early childhood family education program, which that program was already really kind of groundbreaking and foundational in the ways that we support families and parents especially. And the ability to add web-based applications was before its time and really need, and really demonstrated the real value of it when we went through the horrible COVID pandemic, which still rears its head on us at occasion. So with that's enough from me. Excited to hear from Dr. Susan Walker. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ben. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's in my retirement time, I would say it's a rather active retirement, so opportunities to continue to teach and advocate in the field and connect with professionals and connect with colleagues around the world is just such a great joy without the restrictions and demands of higher ed. So thank you, everybody. It really is wonderful to be here, especially to as Ben shared a bit about my background. I've been a practitioner with families, and I have worked with practitioners and with students for a good 40 years now. And so this particular topic that I'm going to speak on today is I would say it's a narrow, but it's a critical and oftentimes forgotten slice of the whole pie when we talk about families and supporting families, what families need, changes that affect families, and specifically related to technology. I'm going to start with a personal anecdote, and that's the other day I went to see some friends in a concert that was about 20 minutes away from my house, and I drove home, and I was about, I don't know, 5 minutes from the house, and I reached over for my phone because I think I was going to plug it in or listen to something safely, and realized I didn't have my phone. And like any of us, my first thought was, you know, where is it? Is it somewhere in the car? But the most important thing was I had that sinking feeling of, oh my gosh, I don't have my phone. And it's moments like that that we realize just how much we've become dependent on these things. And this little thing that we hold in our hand and we shove in our back pocket you know, is a little walking computer, and it connects us to everything. It connects us to each other. I realized I couldn't call somebody to ask them if they found my phone. I couldn't text somebody. I couldn't look up the directions back to the concert venue if I needed to. And I'm old enough that, of course, I know how to do all those things old school, right? But still, it's that heavy dependence that we have on these things. And so with that, I'm going to start my slide presentation. Let me share my screen, and let's see, we'll go here and share and go to slideshow. Great, how's that looking? Okay, good. So technology, and I'm going to use that word very generically, but technology is very much a part of our lives, right? And you know, a lot of times when we think about families and when we listen to Kara, who's going to be speaking next, you know, we're talking about what we call information and communications technology. So what's on our phone, the apps that we use and things like that. And that has become incredibly pervasive in our lives. But it's not the only way, of course, that technology affects us. We also, with our solar panels and the kinds of cars that we drive and the smart cities that we have and our medical technologies, you know, we even have artificial intelligence now where we can carry on a full conversation on ChatGPT. Somebody told me they even asked ChatGPT to talk to them in a certain way. Sort of have a certain inflection on the on the words. So it is very, very mind-blowing, but it reminds us just how much our lives are completely immersed in technology. This is a quote from the National Academies of Science, and this was, what, 7 years ago, that the ultimate effects of technology will be determined by the technical capabilities and by how technology is used by individuals, organizations, and policymakers, and how well we are prepared for respond to the shifts in economic and the local landscape. And so I like this quote because it isn't just these things that are great or these things that are evil. It really is, you know, it's in our control in terms of how they are designed, how they are used. And for those of us who are on the front lines with families, are how we translate the effective and safe use of these. And unfortunately, you know, even in 2017 and even earlier, 10 years ago, futurists were predicting some of these sort of negative effects of technology that we're grappling with now. Things like privacy and how it's changed the way that we work, and the need for retraining and the wider divides, you know, that we're experiencing. And so I do think that as we're, you know, kind of we're immersed in these things, we also have to have a bit more of a meta view about how it's not only impacting families, but again, the wider role and our place in it. So my own training is from an ecological perspective. I have to say that in my work as a practitioner for 10 years before continuing my education, this just made sense to me, because you work with families and you see that whatever is impacting their lives is either controllable or not controllable, but it is very much rooted in the context that families live in. And so when we, or I specifically, and I'm thinking about technology, I think about the family, right? The individual family, the use of technology within the family system, how technology might influence communication, relationships, things like that. And then I'm especially attentive to the direct context that families work in. And by this, we're looking at technology at work, technology at school, technology in the neighborhood, and then all of the various infrastructures that employ technology that affect families, and the way that families use technology that then affect the context, right? And then at a much wider view is that, you know, are the resource availability, the policies, the technology infrastructure, what that means to us as individuals, our privacy, again, what happens to our data, things like that. And there are two areas across this ecological context, one of which we have control over and one we don't have control over, that I see has definite effects on creating differences in us as individuals and then as families. One is equity, that there are equity differences around the world, within our own country, but we're a relatively well-off country. So really we're looking at the world. And what equity differences mean will affect individuals' access to technology, to the quality of technology that they access. And one of the big things I see as a practitioner is to individuals' comfort and skill with using technology. And this is a map of digital well-being around the world. And I like this. I used to use maps of, cell phone ownership around the world, or internet access around the world. And I think for a standpoint of true equity, we're looking at, and again, from a policy perspective, we're looking at far more than just individuals, personal access. We're really looking at those wider infrastructures that affect their access and affect their use. And so there are digital well-being indices around the world. And you can see that, again, the Northern Hemisphere countries that are more economically developed generally have more policies that provide more infrastructure, make internet more affordable, more effective. And those countries south of the hemisphere, certainly countries within Africa, are less well off. The other aspect is time. And time is something we can't have, we don't have anything that we, I wish, but we really can't affect time. And one of the big things that I've seen with time is, as a researcher, as a practitioner, as an educator, as somebody who works with families, is the frustration of technological change. It's a great thing, certainly, right? If you're buying the latest iPhone. However, if you're a researcher and you're trying to keep up with the impact of using technology and its then impact, say, on teenagers and cyberbullying or something like that, by the time your data is collected and cleaned and analyzed and then published, it probably is going to be obsolete. I mean, there could be a new app that people are using. I saw this with a lot of people who were studying MySpace 15 years ago, and then it was eclipsed by Facebook. I have pictures here of, this is just 20 years ago. I mean, some of us still have the same haircut we had 20 years ago, right? So it's absolutely incredible how quickly digital technologies, health technologies, our smart cities, our smart appliances, how rapidly they're changing. I wrote that textbook, has been referred to, and I published it 2 years ago. There is nothing in that whole book on artificial intelligence, because it was still so new at that time. Maybe I referred to it at some point, but I certainly didn't write about it in any real depth, because it was still so new. Well, I have to revise that book just to include AI. So these are just some of the differences. And I have an example here. 20 years ago, Netflix was still sending out DVDs in the mail, right? And now we all just refer to, what do you watch on Netflix? Because it's a streaming service. So my point being is that technology is changing so rapidly that it is very, very hard to keep up. So those of us in the front lines of trying to translate research impacts to families, to our classes, to our policymakers, are very frustrated, because it's changing so rapidly. And so we always have that little asterisk of, well, as far as we know, right? And so we do the best that we can. So equity definitely affects how well we can access and use technology, and the divides between individuals, and then certainly time, which we don't have much to do with. So we're now in what's considered the tertiary phase. And there's a few things, right? In the last 25 years, now we have nearly ubiquitous use. The information communications technology has reduced a whole bunch of barriers. Things have become far more efficient, and that's wonderful. And we do have an amazing amount of research that supports the value of ICT to family life and human development. Yet we are also identifying that there are a number of threats through exposure, security, privacy, things like that. And our research needs to be much, much better. Much of what we're depending on now is highly correlational, and we need to do those studies. And again, it's really hard to do anything too longitudinal because, when you measure 10 years down the road, things will have changed. So what I want to do today, my focus is, this is just setting the stage, because my real focus is on a piece of this pie that is really not discussed much, and that's the professionals who work with families. So much of what I see come across my computer on a daily basis on the hits on threads and in the news, in the mainstream media, are research reports about the impacts on kids or on individuals, or about some egregious thing that a tech company is doing, or the effects of COVID, right? Things like that. But nobody is talking about the professionals who work with families, And this has been an incredible source of frustration for me, because my primary focus in my career has been and is with practitioners. We know that practitioners work in all of the communities that influence families. Our practitioners hold such incredible influence over families, with families. They are so trusted. They're consistent source of information. They're role models for many. They connect them to resources. ICT plays a critical role in their own delivery of service. And the knowledge that practitioners hold also affects the quality of service that they can provide virtually or, through various texts and apps. And yet, in my own research with practitioners over the last 20 years, I found that their own knowledge is so precarious. It's so highly dependent on whatever kind of training they might have had, but usually their training is very experiential and very personal. Also, the kind of resources and support the family practitioners get around technology is also highly, highly variable. So just to give a little bit of background, my own research foundations on this, I started kind of paying attention to this good 14, 15 years ago. So I started by just asking questions of professionals when I was at conferences, and then putting surveys on their tables during, the round tables that everybody eats at. Then I was doing some national surveys, and then partnered with the National Council on Family Relations. As Ben mentioned, I created fortunately with a National Science Foundation grant, was able to create, design, and implement technology in their ECFE program in Minnesota. And in doing that, also not only did direct observations of how teachers were integrating technology in their practice, but also did 13 very in-depth interviews with practitioners. And then when COVID hit, I was able to do some before and after COVID research with educators and family practitioners in Minnesota. So I'm going to start with just a few quotes that I think really got to the issue. This was from a family professional, and the key of what she's saying here is her own frustration that her own lack of technology knowledge and resources means that she feels like she's a failure to the families that she works with, because she knows they come in with questions. She knows many of them are asking, to use phones, and she can't meet it, right? I can never bring them up to that level. And not just all families, not just the, but especially the families that are on the margins that we all want to reach. And that's where she really felt a loss. This was a family professional 3 years before COVID, and she said, so in a way, I haven't developed my own technical skills because I haven't need to use them. Well, 3 years down the road, COVID hit, right? And the same family professional was at a precipice and feeling like, oh my gosh, right? I didn't have to learn it, but now I do. And finally, this is what I see over and over and over. I would really implore you not to look around you at the way that other professions are resourced with technology, but ask the hard question about the family professionals that you care the most about and how well they're resourced. Because what I found in school districts or in healthcare or in social work or in other areas where there were sort of related professionals who work directly with families, they were not prioritized when it came to receiving technology. And what that meant was they had to use their personal devices and they had to pay out of their own pocket. And we already know they're not well paid, right? So this is what the field's focus is, primarily this, right? Technology used by families and the impacts on individuals, which then tells us that if we're going to reach families, technology is a content area, you know, like what age should my child be to get a smartphone, right? How will my child be affected by cyberbullying? Do I really need two-factor authentication when I'm putting that new software on, right? So it's both a content area and a focus of service delivery. So this is where most of our attention goes, right? What we need to be doing is then think about the front lines individuals who are working with families and ask the question, what are they using? What is their skill level? How comfortable do they feel answering those questions, being an educator with those families, translating that research, answering those questions about two-factor authentication, right? Because again, they're there, they're trusted, they're familiar. These are people families are going to. And then finally, at a much higher level, the role of professional organizations and the policies they set, and especially standards, are professional standards that impact the training and the development and the support to family professionals. So I call in this, you know, in my work we're very lucky in Minnesota with the early childhood family education. We also have a state teaching license for parenting. We are the only state in the United States that has this. And it was started 40 years ago when they designed the early childhood family education program with the idea that if you're going to have a licensed teacher with children, you should have a licensed teacher working with their parents. So it's very much helped me be even more immersed in the education field. And this is the T-Pact model. This was created again, almost 20 years ago in education. But the thing that I like about it is that it roots technology, knowledge, and skill along with the other things that we care about with professionals. What do they know and how do they do it? How do they deliver their service, right? So in this case, it's pedagogical knowledge. And so we could also put in practitioner knowledge, however you want to put it, but it looks at technology knowledge and technology competence along with content and practice. And I think we could use this again with all fields, and I've used it with family practitioners. So the research that I did from like 2010 through 2016, 2020, just as a summary, I asked questions with professionals. What are you using? You know, how comfortable do you use with, are you with using technology? What I was especially interested was, again, context. What are the contexts that influence their interest in use of technology? And I can stand behind these. This was repeated. I saw this over and over and over, and I saw it anecdotally in my own observations with practitioners. Generally, they were positive about technology. They used a variety, but mostly defaulted to those that they knew. Like, I use Word. Why? Because I have it on my home computer, right? They're motivated by their own interests. not the expectations of their employers. They had a mixed range of work supports. Again, most of them were using their own devices and most of them were self-trained. So you look at this, is this what you would want of a medical professional? Is this something that you would want of your child's school teacher? This is what our family professionals were up against. They truly were left to their own devices. Now, this fancy path model, I included because there's a model called the technology acceptance model that has long been used. And I use this in a lot of my research over and over, and I use this most recently with our national study of family professionals. And what these labels just primarily mean are TA means technology acceptance. And I like technology acceptance more than technology use because use changes, right? Using your smartphone, using PowerPoint, using an app, that's all going to change. What we're really caring about is people's openness and their acceptance to using innovation, right? And so what I was looking at was the perceived usefulness of the technology and the perceived ease of use about that technology. And then the W's on my left side are workplace encouragement and workplace infrastructure. And the big summary here is, in fact, context matters. That when family professionals had a supportive work context, they were encouraged to use technology by their employers. They had others they could turn to talk about technology. They had the workplace infrastructure. They were given resources, training, and whatnot. It affected their acceptance in the use of technology. It makes sense, but somebody had to demonstrate it. So that's what I did. So that was all pre-COVID. Then COVID, with our family practitioners, became a natural experiment around what is called adaptive expertise. Again, this is a model pulled from education from Linda Darling-Hammond, who is a teacher preparation professional, practitioner, and professor. And they coined the word adaptive expertise, which is essentially that if you give somebody too much innovation too quickly, they're going to become frustrated. If you give them nothing at all and they continue with their jobs, right, they're going to just be a routine expert, but they're not going to be very innovative. And they will not be very efficient in their job. So COVID hit these family practitioners. And so again, I had the great good fortune to work with them, research them when COVID hit, ask questions, and then a year later. And the big thing here is that what the purple bars indicate is that over a year's time, statistically, they felt that they were better prepared to use technology. The sad thing here is that they needed a pandemic to do it. But they were feet to the fire. They were forced to find ways to teach with technology, to teach remotely. And by virtue of that, they did feel more comfortable using technology at the end of the year. These are the kinds of resources that they were given. On average, the practitioners reported that they were given about 2 resources to help them, either training or extra time for planning. Some were given, say, a laptop to use at home. I really feel sad for the 17% who were given no resources at all to reach families. And this is part of a much larger study, but I cannot tell you the impact on families from these professionals keeping the program going during COVID. And what then influenced their comfort in using technology? Well, again, experience. They had to use it every day, so that helped. Other professionals, and this is a key thing. So when Ben mentioned that I'm interested in the social context, I'm interested in people helping people. And in this case, the fact that they had other professionals that they could talk to was incredibly valuable to them. So It was great, right? So family practitioners came into COVID and, things were kind of variable. And then COVID hit, feet to the fire. They got through it. They felt more comfortable using technology, and they were given some resources to do it. But again, the challenge here is that it was very tenuous. It kind of depended. It depended on the school district. It depended on the individual area. It depended on, a lot of them quit because they were so frustrated. They were so overwhelmed. I'm sure you've heard this with school teachers as well. So yes, giving some resources and with experience and the support of other people, they were really benefited. But it's not enough. What we really need, and this is the key message here, is at a much higher level, we have to care about these family professionals with the standards that they have for training, for technical assistance, for professional development. This is where we need to be. Just as an example, in my state, the Board of Teaching, for every licensed teacher, these are some of the technology requirements of all of them. They have to show competency in safe and effective student learning, deploying technology, especially to reach diverse learners, not just any learner, not just using any technology, but diverse learners, avoiding discrimination and promoting equity. So not just using it, but ensuring that all learners can use it, right? Possessing the technological knowledge in the content area. So while you're learning how to use it in practice and make sure your learners can use it, you're also up to date on all of that research that's coming out about the impact of technology on families, social media, cyberbullying, yada, yada, right? Your digital citizenship. I can't tell you the number of practitioners I've worked with who really don't understand about attribution, right? Or about, if it's okay to just take something off the internet. Digital citizenship is huge. And then again, comfort with using a variety. So if we have standards, those standards then will translate into how we prepare professionals. Those standards can then also be used for what employers are looking for when they hire professionals, and provide that workplace encouragement when they're providing supports, or they're providing professional development, or they're looking at their competencies. Fortunately, we have so many different, field standards for various professionals. This is just the United States, and this is a short list. But I would look at each one of these individual groups and look at, this is good, and then where does technology fit in terms of the standards. And I will tell you, looking at each one of these individually, some are great and some are incredibly generic. And then I see these kinds of things all over. And I share this because this is a kind of a learning piece for everyone. This is very common, right? So this is from UNICEF. This is about digital literacy, embed digital skills and so forth throughout the life and course for all children through multiple pathways. And the first question in my mind, and I hope that now in your mind, is, and what about the professionals who are going to teach this to kids? What about the parents who are going to hear about digital literacy, and the kids are going to come home and they're going, oh, we're learning about digital literacy. And the parents are going, huh? Right? Again, what a lot of the people at the research level and the people who are creating these documents are forgetting is that the people on the front lines who are the most important to children, who are the most important to parents, are those professionals they work with on a regular basis. So any of these documents, I want to see one that has been created for the professionals. Right? So in summary, how can we support professionals? We need to look at their workplace climate and their culture in terms of how they are supported, reinforced, and recognized. It should be an expectation, and it should be reinforced. Their own policies. I mean, a lot of times people go, well, I don't know what I'm doing with social media because it's never been made clear to me if I can be on Facebook when I'm relating to families, right? So policies need to be clear. There need to be updated and ongoing research and dissemination of those research findings. We can't depend on professionals to be combing the literature. They need sessions like this one that summarize the research, say, on social media, so it helps them out. And then finally, we do need professional standards on technology. Other fields are doing it. I tell you, other fields are doing it. And so anything that we're doing with family professionals, you know, we need to hone in on that as well. So thank you. Thank you very much. That brings me to the end. And I have a copy or a picture of the virtual cover of my virtual book, but that's the QR code. And so if you hold your phone up, you can also access the book that way. So with that, I will stop sharing and hopefully, good. I guess timing wise, that worked out, right?
Perfect. Wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. That was really wonderful. I'm struck by so many aspects of the presentation and really, I think thinking about this aspect, right, of the motivations and the expectations, the way that these professionals are thinking about themselves, and that real key element of, you know, what are the ways that we're going to motivate professionals to seek out this training. And so, you know, I'm imagining ways that could be very restrictive, right? Where it's, well, the motivation is you do it or you don't get to practice anymore, right? Which would result in a huge loss of professionals. Or is there a specialization that would come with some kind of compensation or expertise, as we see, you know, with licensure? So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on some best practices or recommendations on what we could be thinking about in the context of, you know, what could happen next to really promote professionals getting this technological competence and literacy.
That's a great question. And of course it depends, right? It like everything. Because I think about the individual practitioner, and so if I think of the teachers that I work with, they are motivated by needing a certain number of professional development credits to maintain their licensure. And they have to do that over a certain period of time, right? And so that's a carrot. And most of them are happy to, you know, get the professional development credits because they have a really wide range of topics, you know, that they can get them in. And so I would say it'd be then two things. One is whoever is setting the policy on those professional development credits can also indicate where those credits need to come in. So for instance, when I work with childcare providers, a certain number of their professional development credits had to be in child development. And then after that, they could choose however many others. So it was kind of mandated on, you know, on the area. So that could be one thing, would be taking whoever is setting the policy on professional development credits, is technology included there, you know, and how is it being included? Because there's a number of different sort of slots you could put it in. I think the other thing would be just the fact that technology is included. So rather than so that it's you know, somebody is doing the professional credits, that they make sure technology is part of that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I've seen professional groups be very satisfied with themselves that they're just requiring professional development credits, but it's so wide. And so it would be taking a look at that again and saying, oh, we're missing this piece, or this is a critical piece for our professionals. You know, how much on technology are we including? So I think if there are professionals that are needing professional development credits, right, that would be one avenue to maintain their licensure. The other thing that I see that I'm horrified by is the preparation in higher ed. And so, you know, whether it's a 4-year degree, it's a 2-year degree, it's getting a certification, whatever it is, whoever is establishing those needs to include technology in that. And some are, some aren't. I developed the course that I have the textbook for, came from a course I created in 2017, because I was looking at these undergraduate students who were in a family social science department, knowing that they were going to be family professionals, and they were not being prepared in any way, shape, or form related to technology. And that seems silly. And so I developed the course, and that course, I haven't checked recently, but it was the only one in the United States. There were no other human development and family studies programs that had technology programs that were earmarked for their majors. So now it's not to say there weren't other technology courses available that students could take and that they weren't recommended to take. But again, we have to look at preparation and who are the folks who are in charge of the content of that preparation, and are they including technology, right? I think if they're younger administrators, maybe they are. If they're older administrators and they're going by, well, these are fine standards from before. So I do think part of it is not just in the professional development, but again, just in the preparation. And I would hold any of the community colleges, technical colleges, 4-year institutions accountable to the inclusion of technology in their preparation.
Wonderful. Yeah, really lovely to hear. And I think it's like so many things that we're doing, right? It's so dependent on so many factors. If it were easy, it would have been done. And so how do we clarify that complexity? So again, thank you so much, Dr. Walker. Really wonderful. We'll have opportunities to ask more questions to you at the end, but I want to transition to our second speaker, Dr. Kara Alaimo, faculty member at Fairleigh Dickinson University, associate professor. Dr. Alaimo is the author of the book, Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back. She has been writing for CNN Opinion about the social impact of social media and issues affecting women and girls since 2016. From 2012 to 2013, she served as the head of communications for the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda. A group of heads of state and other eminent thinkers convened to recommend the world's next plan for eradicating poverty and achieving sustainable development. In 2011, she was appointed by President Obama as spokesperson for international affairs in the U.S. Treasury Department, where she communicated global economic diplomacy initiatives, including America's bilateral economic relationships, engagement in multilateral institutions, including the G20, World Bank, and IMF, and international monetary, trade, development, environmental, and energy policy. She's previously served as the first press secretary of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, and is a wonderful colleague at FDU for me, a good friend, and really thrilled that she was willing to come and speak and share her expertise with us. So welcome, Kara.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. Today I'm going to be talking about how parents and educators and other adults can handle their kids' use of social media. And thank you, Ben, for that kind introduction. I've included some info here in case you'd like to find me in the future, but I'm easy to find online, of course. But, you know, with the launch of my book, I have been speaking to parents, teachers, superintendents in schools and other venues all over the country about how we solve this problem at the micro level, right? How we handle our own kids' use of social media and the use of social media in schools. And for today, I've pulled together a list of the big questions that I get asked over and over about this topic. As we know, parents are just so hungry for advice on how they can handle their own kids' use of social media. And so I'd love to share some of my thoughts on these big questions, and then of course, happy to answer your questions. So one of the big questions I get first is, what do we need to teach kids to prepare them for the world of social media before they're old enough to have phones and apps? And I have young kids myself, and I'm already thinking about the skills and values that they are going to need to have when they are older and inevitably join social networks. And a couple of the big ones that I'd stress, unsurprisingly, are kindness, right? And this idea of looking out for friends who might be in trouble. Once they, go online, it's going to be really important to teach them something called positive slamming, right? You see someone being trolled or bullied, engaging with the post is actually not a good idea, although I think it's very tempting for all of us, because that will just signal to algorithms that people like the post and want to see more of it. So the better solution, of course, is to post something positive about the person and reach out to them privately, and make sure that they're okay. So these are all skills that we can teach kids from a really young age, right? About supporting people when they are the victim of unkindness, about spreading kindness, about valuing people no matter what they look like. And then another huge one for kids of all genders, but I think in particular for girls who spend the most time on visually oriented platforms like Instagram, is talking about why we shouldn't judge anyone, but especially ourselves for their appearances. Kate Mann is a philosopher at Cornell University. I think she's one of the most important feminists alive, and her book Unshrinking was published in January. And there's this passage in her book where she talks about how she would take out Instagram and show pictures of people on Instagram to her young daughter, people of all different sizes and races and levels of ability. And what she would say to her daughter was, "I'm so glad they're here in the world with us." And I thought that was one of the most beautiful and effective ways I have ever heard of teaching a child. Really, probably we all need these reminders, right? Of how you approach another human being. And I think, these kinds of skills, talking about appearances and kindness and why we value people, are going to serve kids really well when they inevitably end up online. How should schools handle the use of phones by students? I feel strongly that schools need to force kids to put their phones away for the school day. In a lot of schools, we find that, kids can take out their phones at recess or in between classes. And what's not happening when they're staring at their phones is they're not developing those social interactions and relationships with their peers that are really essential skills for them and really essential relationships. The average teen is getting something like 234 notifications on their phone every single day. A quarter of them come in during the school day. And so even if you're taking a quick glance at your phone, we all know this from personal experience, right? Then they're walking into the classroom and what they've just seen is still on their mind instead of what they should be paying attention to. A huge number of high school teachers in the United States also say that phones are a big problem, distracting students in classes themselves. So I think the best answer is to leave them at home if you're a parent and enforce that decision. And if you're a school, really lock them up for the entire school day. Another big one, of course, is at what age should kids be allowed to use social media, and what can we as parents do to enforce our decisions? And, as I go around talking to parents, I think parents are stressed enough already about this issue without anyone shaming them and making them feel worse for their decisions. One of the things that I have heard over and over from parents is that many of their kids are on phones and screens at a much earlier age than they otherwise would have been because of the pandemic, of course. But I think to the extent that kids are younger and there's still time, I think it's a really good idea for parents to start talking to the parents of their kids' friends while they're really young and collectively agree that their kids won't have phones until a particular age. Because as we know, if all of our kids' friends already have phones, they're being left out of social plans, right? You are the worst parent alive at that point. So it's really important to get on the same page about this. When I'm asked, I know this sounds ambitious, I say that I would prefer for my daughters not to join social media until they're 16. And I know that that probably sounds like saying age 40. I said this to a New York Times reporter recently, and she threatened to put my oldest daughter's 16th birthday on her calendar and follow up with me as to whether I could actually pull this off. But one thing I will say to parents with no judgment is that really solid research out of the UK shows that there are a couple of really critical periods where being on social media is associated with lower life satisfaction a year later. And one of those periods is the time when kids are going through puberty. So sometimes parents will say to me, my kid and I have this argument every single night. They want a phone. We know we're going to get one. Do I really have to have this argument for the next year, or can I just give them the phone now and move on with my life? And I say, well, unfortunately, like, you know, if this is the time period, right, where your son or daughter is going through puberty, like research really does show that holding off a year can make a valuable difference. So no judgments. We all know how difficult it is to keep this technology away from our kids. But if your kids are really young and you have the luxury of runway here, it's something to think about. Another big thing I talk about is how social media negatively affects the body image and mental health of our children. So one of the stories I tell in the first chapter of my book, which is called Girl Meets Instagram, is the story of a woman who asked me to call her Vivian. And she wrote to me after reading one of my CNN columns, and she said to me, I got my eating disorder on Instagram as a teenager. She was 15 years old when Instagram launched. She was into yoga, so she posted a picture of herself doing a handstand, and that picture was picked up by a so-called Fitspo, fitness inspiration page, which sucked her down a rabbit hole of toxic Fitspo content. She is now in her late 20s, and unsurprisingly, even after years of treatment, she continues to struggle with an eating disorder. And Vivian also works part-time as a personal trainer and told me that her clients, of course, often bring her their phones, pull out Instagram, show her images of the so-called Instagram body, which she and I know can usually only be achieved through surgery, and say, I want to look like that. And so, you know, my big concern is, again, it's girls who spend more time on the visually oriented platforms. And there is nothing to signal to them or any of us that so many of the images they're seeing have been heavily manipulated and filtered. So obviously, one of my big demands that I'd love to see from tech companies is sending us a signal when images have been manipulated, which would be such a great reminder for our children. But in the meantime, I think it's really important to have these conversations with our kids of all genders about why so much of the content they're seeing isn't actually a realistic depiction of the human body, isn't a realistic depiction of what people's lives really look like. They're heavily curated and filtered, and just why it's a good idea to stay far away from this content. Another big thing is sexting. And so I thankfully grew up just before this era started. And I think it's really hard for us as parents who are from that generation to wrap our heads around the fact that sexting is a normal part of youth culture in our country right now. One girl who I interviewed for my book, who I was put in touch with by her mother, by the way, said to me, like, explained to me that, like, you create these images in advance and you save them on For My Eyes Only on Snapchat, so that when a boy asks them for you, they're at the ready. You don't have to do the work then. And I think it's just so important. Well, it's important to understand the culture and where kids are coming from. I think this is one of those places where it's just essential for parents to put their feet down and really have firm rules and boundaries with our kids. And so one thing we know is that sextortion is astonishingly common. And so this is where someone establishes an emotional relationship with your child online, probably pretending to be someone other than who they are, convinces them to share one racy image, and then the next message that comes through is, Venmo me $25,000 in the next hour, or I'm texting this to all of your classmates and putting it on the internet, and or a demand for them to engage in more sex acts. There's also the possibility of hackings. There's the possibility of so-called revenge porn, which is not a term that I'm comfortable with, but you know what I'm talking about, right? A relationship ends. Now someone has decided to share images. And it's just too dangerous. We know that when intimate images of women or girls end up online, it puts them at greater risk of depression. It puts them at greater risk of suicide. It makes it harder for them to date. It makes it harder for them to find a job. It is life destroying. And so again, we need to have these conversations with our kids very early on. And it is also technically the case that a child could be prosecuted for producing child pornography of themselves under US law. So this is just a place where we unfortunately have to have these really uncomfortable conversations and frighten our kids, rightly so, about the potential consequences. So I've mentioned sextortionists, but I think it's also important to talk about why people who kids are connecting with may not be who they think they are. And so I recently covered the American Academy of Pediatrics conference in Orlando for CNN, and a big piece of research that was presented there was a study of cases of children who'd been sexually assaulted who presented at a particular hospital in California, and an astonishing number of them first connected with their predator on social media. One of the new safety features that Instagram has that I really, really like is if a teen sets up an account, it is possible for parents to monitor who they are communicating with without looking at the content of those messages. And I think that might strike a really good balance for older kids, right? Where you don't feel like mom or dad is looking at what you're sending to your friends, but mom or dad is saying, hold the phone, like, who are you talking to? And is this person really, a kid in your middle school? Another big thing we need to talk about, so what do we need to teach kids about deep fakes and disinformation they'll encounter or even be tempted to create online? I am with Ben here in New Jersey, and in New Jersey at the high school in Westfield, boys in the school recently created new deep fakes of female classmates. So deep fakes, as we know, are fake images or video created with artificial intelligence. And what I really couldn't get past in the Wall Street Journal's reporting of this issue was that parents in the town of Westfield were divided about whether this was a big deal or whether this was just boys being boys, kids being kids. As I've just said, it is life destroying for a woman or a girl, really someone of any gender, to have their intimate images end up online. And so I think it's so important to talk to kids about how life destroying this is and why not only they should never create, but they should never engage with this kind of content. And more broadly, we have to talk to them about disinformation and how we cannot believe the things that we see on social media, especially things about health or beauty routines or medicine or cures. And this is why we need to independently verify things with other sources, and why doctors are the people who should be making our medical decisions, because they, of course, understand our full medical histories and the context of the situation and can make appropriate diagnoses. A piece I'm working on next for CNN is about this generation of teenagers who are turning to TikTok rather than therapists, right? And why that's so dangerous. Another thing I write about in my book is that it's a big myth that kids want to spend all their time on social media. And so it's tempting, I think, for parents to think that. The researcher Dana Boyd interviewed American teenagers, and they told her quite clearly that they would much rather get together with their friends in person rather than be communicating with them on social media. Why are they not getting together in person? Because they don't have transportation and because of their parents' rules. And so I think it's a myth that kids are safer at home than they are meeting up with their friends. While that may sometimes be true, it's also the case that our kids could be upstairs in their bedrooms connecting with predators on TikTok. And so I do think it's worth considering allowing kids to spend more time in person with peers. We know who they're with. We teach them the boundaries. We teach them about their safety. We keep an eye on them. but that can be so much better and more age appropriate than interacting with the whole world on social networks. So many of you are probably familiar with John Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation, and there's a big difference between his book and mine. So, John acknowledges that kids sometimes say that social media is healthy for them, and he says we should ignore what they say because they're wrong. And here's where I do have a big disagreement. One of the places where I have a disagreement, we routinely hear from kids that social networks are places where they might be isolated and marginalized in their physical communities, and then they go online and they find their people, or they develop interests that turn into jobs, or they get involved in really important causes. And so I do think it's important for us to consider how social media can empower our kids, and then think about how we can teach them to use social networks in those ways. And one of the things I often suggest to parents is that you shock the heck out of your kids and ask them, if they're on TikTok, to sit down and look at TikTok with you, right? You don't even have to know how it works. But the point is, if you search for content that aligns with their interests, maybe your kid likes pets, is interested in being a veterinarian, so you search for and consume that content together. That, of course, is sending a signal to algorithms that your kid likes that content. So they're going to show your kid more of it, even when you're not together. And so I think it's a really, really good idea to spend time with your kids looking for content about causes, helping them find healthy communities. Another thing, I was recently on a panel with an educator who said, social media is phenomenal. If there's someone who's bothering me, I click one button and they disappear. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do that offline, right? And so teaching kids like the ways that they can use it in healthy ways is, I think, a really good idea. Another big question I get is, are there any social networks that you think are safe for kids? So I wanted to tell you about one which is called Promly. It was created here in New Jersey by a teen therapist named Jen Libby, in conversation with young people. And she really designed it to be a place where kids connect with one another based on shared interest, get involved in congressional youth advocacy, have mental health tools available to them. And so they age gate so that kids aren't connecting with predators, which is great. It also means that I can't join and check it out myself. I'm way too old. But it sounds promising. And for me, the bigger takeaway is that all of the things that many of us have been calling for social networks to do are actually really possible, right? It's possible to keep kids away from predators. It's possible to connect them with positive content. It's possible to connect them with appropriate people their age. And so I just encourage you to check it out and perhaps consider it as a resource for children. Another big one is how we can help kids find healthy content and communities on social networks. And I really think it's a matter of listening to our children. We all know our children, understanding what their interests are, looking for and consuming this content together. And then again, training algorithms, which will hopefully show them more of it in the future. Another big question is, how can parents and teachers who aren't digital natives ourselves gain the knowledge to teach our kids how to use social media responsibly? And this is hard. One of the things I'd say is that you don't have to use TikTok often yourself to be consuming the mainstream media and know that what's trending on TikTok, because it's covered in the news, in the media, is Sephora Kids and Botox babies content telling 10-year-olds that they need full faces of makeup and telling 20-year-olds that they need Botox, which of course is a terrible idea. And so I would just say that I do think it's possible to follow the mainstream news conversation and mainstream media coverage and get a sense of some of the trends that are happening on social media and talk to children, because we know this is the content that is likely at the top of their feeds. Once kids have phones, how can we set healthy rules for when and how they're allowed to use them? I want to say that I think it's really important to develop these rules in conversation with our kids, and in the context of our own lives. So a couple of the big rules I often hear are no phones when kids are doing their homework, or maybe they get their phones when they're done. That's all great until they have to contact a friend because they have a question about the assignment, or they're collaborating as a group, or they need to use the internet to conduct research. Another overall general great one is no phones at the dinner table. My husband works a ton of nights and weekends, and so I almost always have my phone on the dinner table when he's not there, because he tries to FaceTime in for a couple minutes if he can to connect with our daughters. So, there's going to be so many reasonable exceptions that are called for, and kids will have some really great ideas. But in general, the big thing I'd say is that we know that the human brain cannot multitask. It's not possible. And so kids need some time apart from their phones to do their work, to read, to look people in the eye and have face-to-face conversations. And it's important to find ways to do that within the context of your lives. And last but not least, the piece of advice that I have for parents that I say is most important is make sure kids can know they can come to us if they're in trouble. So one of the people I interviewed for my book is one of the top attorneys who you call, if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford her, I guess, in Brooklyn, who handles cases of sexual exploitation online. And she told me that she regularly sees kids who are being sextorted, who are afraid to talk to their parents about it because they're afraid that their parents will take away their phones. And so for me, the number one thing is that my daughters have to know that even if they disregard everything I've talked to you about in this presentation, all the rules that we've agreed upon, and now they're in trouble, they can still come to me and I will still help them, right? And they don't have to fear the consequences. So thank you so much. And I look forward to questions.
Wonderful. Really, really excellent. And so much practical information that I think is so valuable for parents. And so I think where I wanted to start, I always take my moderator privilege to ask the first question. Where do you think is the opportunity? Because so much of what you've talked about is parents and children having healthy, transparent, honest conversations. How do we foster that, right? Because that is important, social media or not, it's an essential first step. What are some guidelines or suggestions that you have in fostering those relationships?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, because it's not one of those things you can start when your kid is 13, 14, 15, and when they start using social media, right? And so, this is one of those things, and like this relationship that you start building basically from before your kid can talk, right? And it's creating an open environment where you can acknowledge uncomfortable things and have difficult conversations, right? And ultimately, I think like talk about your values, right? And it doesn't have we don't have to be philosophers, to think about things like being kind to people and liking people even if they're different from us, right? But I think it is a matter of, it just starts so young, and kids knowing they can approach you when they've done something wrong, right? They learn big lessons from how you react to mistakes. And just knowing that you are engaged in an ongoing conversation about the world and their lives, and you're interested in their content and what's important to them and their interests, and you can be trusted to guide them rather than, be such a tough disciplinarian that they're frightened to approach you.
Great. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's wonderful. So I'm going to go into the chat, and we've got 3 questions from Susan and Roshana and Marcia, all around the same general idea. And I think this really applies both to Susan and Kara. How can we better integrate parents and their involvement into all aspects of what they're doing, right? In the context of working with family professionals, for Susan, for just thinking about how do we kind of educate and engage parents with their kids for social media use and technology. So I don't know which of you wants to take that on first.
Well, I'll use so early, right? So as Kara was saying, it's not something that you can, leave till kids are later. Although the one thing I would say is, as parents are continually playing catch up with new apps and new devices and things like that, it's remarkable to me, even teaching undergraduates, how an undergraduate who is 20 will say that their sibling who is 3 or 4 years younger, like have so much more technology knowledge, and they're on different types of devices and apps and that sort of thing. So, it's always a catch up. I'll just say that, again, using the example of our program in Minnesota, the Early Childhood Family Education Program, this is a program that all families have access to from the birth of their child until the child is age 5. And they come in and they have an hour of parent-child interaction time with other families under the guidance of a licensed early childhood teacher and a licensed parenting educator, and then they have their separate time. And, even if you don't have an ECFE program, things like that can be modeled in communities where one of the values that I see with ECFE is that it kind of sets the stage at a very early age, not for children alone, but an early sort of child age for parents when they're new parents, of interacting with professionals. My own experience, and a lot of us, have children that are with us when they're very young, or they go to childcare and then they start school. And it's almost like there's this barrier that goes up with education, where now we drop the kids off and you leave them with us for 6 or 8 hours, and then you pick them up, and that's, there's this divide. And so any kind of opportunity that we can have for parents and professionals to interact at early ages, whether it's in the birthing suite and at the hospital, that first year, whether it's at community events, whether it's, and especially at childcare and early childhood education. And then so that when children start school, it's they already feel comfortable and more confident interacting with professionals, and can have conversations, and again, so that the professionals feel more comfortable with parents, because it does go both ways. And there's a whole lot of childcare providers I've worked with and teachers who will say, I love the kids and I hate the parents, right? And what they mean by that is that they don't feel comfortable. Some of them are much younger than the parents, right? And so they haven't been taught the dialogue, the conversation, the communication with the central focus of the child. And so that's a whole other area we need to be addressing with our professionals who work with children, is engaging parents, so the parents and professionals together see each other as experts who can work together. So I guess my bottom line would be to start early and to really focus, as Kara was saying, on the relationship building between the child and the parent, but also the relationship building between parents and the professionals who work with children.
Yeah, I would just add, the difference in the US is so stark. If my daughters were growing up in Finland, they would be learning how content is designed to manipulate their emotions and how to identify altered images at the same time as they were learning how to read and write. And, I teach college students who routinely tell me that my classes are the first official lessons they've ever received on how to spot misinformation. And so it really is negligent. I really like the idea of events for parents at libraries and in community centers to teach them how to teach these things to their kids. And then just the other piece of advice I'd have for parents is that unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to how we model, how we use our own technology. And when we put it away and having conversations with our kids and looking them in the eye, and often when I can't, I try to explain why. I think it's a big burden on parents to have to narrate everything we do in our lives, but often I will say, I'm responding to your teacher about this because we're planning the class Halloween party, or I am paying our electric bills so that the lights will go on when we flip the switch. And, and I think it's useful to let kids know when we're ignoring them and why, and then also make sure we're giving them our attention to model being good digital citizens.
So we have another question here, specifically focused on kind of how to make the decision of what age do we integrate technology into our children's lives, and how do we engage with that in a meaningful, effective way? So Kara, maybe start us off.
So I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is a question of enormous privilege. particularly in the United States when we don't have universal childcare. I was speaking to a student earlier who was, explaining with horror that, she sees 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds commenting on, videos on TikTok. And it's not great, right, to have 7 or 8-year-olds on TikTok, clearly. But as a parent, I understand exactly why 7-year-olds are on TikTok, right? Because I know that if my children are homesick and I have to teach my class online, there's exactly one way to know that they are not going to get off the sofa for that time period. And it is giving them a piece of technology. And so, we live in a society that doesn't provide like the childcare support that parents need. We also live in a society that is not very kind to parents when our children act like children in public places like restaurants and airports. And so, if you are a single parent, or if you're a low-income family and parents are like working multiple jobs to make ends meet, sometimes giving a kid a screen is like becomes their childcare provider. And really, the reason that my kids don't spend more time on screens is because of my enormous privilege, right? To be able to afford to send them to a Montessori school. And so I think that that's a big part of it. I do think that I have found in my own experience, like some programs that I truly think are okay. So I know someone else in the chat was asking about toddlers and what works for them. My kids are on ABC Mouse. It's a computer program. They've learned a lot from it. And every once in a while, they start talking about the Great Wall of China, and I do a double take, and then I remember it was ABC Mouse, right? So I think that, there's some technology that kids can learn from, certainly in moderation, but there's so many other supports that, parents need from our society if we're really going to keep young kids off of phones and social media.
I would just add, in my experience, when I go into early childhood settings, I facilitate conversations with groups of parents around this issue. And what I find is, it all comes from the home, and in terms of parents' individual decision-making about what's best for their child. And so the challenge is a lot of them really need to like read Kara's book and to listen to her talks, and to have more information, because the challenge the parents face is that they don't know a lot about this stuff, and they certainly didn't grow up with it. And so it's hard for them to be able to know whether or not things are safe. I find that the parents, to answer your question, Ben, in terms of the age, is the parents that feel more deeply rooted in their own parenting values, in the sense of, if they start with, when Kara was talking about, putting away phones at the dinner time, there are families that are not, like that family value of family connection and togetherness is just not even on their radar. That's not a judgment. I'm just saying that they really haven't really settled into what their own family values are. And then in other cases, families are very deeply rooted into, we're going to spend time together as a family, and that time together as a family can also involve technology. So there can be the families that are like absolutely no tech at any time and things like that. And then, I'll have dads who will say, I play this game with my kid and he's 3 years old and we have the best time together and we really learn a lot. Or I'm on, YouTube watching the videos, watching Bluey with my children. I love Bluey. I'm learning so much from it. And so it's that time of parent engagement, right? And so oftentimes in our discussions, we'll get down to the values, right down to the roots of what is it that you want as a family with your children, for your children. And it's the same kind of conversation you'd have around sex and drugs and, other driving and things like that, that it's like when parents feel more confident, when they feel more comfortable in what they want for themselves and their children, it's a better foundation, I think, for then asking all of these other questions and dealing with sort of that social context of pressure of the other kids who are like, well, I have this, why don't you have that? Or I'm on TikTok, why aren't you on it? That it's part of that dialogue parents can have, with their kids. the other thing I guess I would just throw in are the whole variety of different types of families, right? And so as Kara was saying, you know, there's privilege, there's also families of divorce, there's also families with very, you know, from different ethnicities and creeds and backgrounds who also have, you know, Kevin Kelly had a wonderful thing about the Amish and choosing technology relative to how it would work in the Amish community. And they chose as a full community to look at whether or not this would value the community. And so, you know, it comes back to that, it depends, Ben, right? Is, you know, while our research is still examining things like age and impact on different kids at different times and different technologies and frequency and exposure and that sort of thing, we also have to, you know, regard that while that's going on, children are in different family contexts. And so you can also recommend a certain phone time or not. And a kid's going to go, I have to have a phone because I'm at my dad's house and I have to be able to connect over here. Or I had a really heartbreaking conversation with a high school student a week ago who we were talking about cell phones in the school. And she was, yeah, they won't let us do this and this. And then she said, and who am I supposed to contact though, if there's a school shooting? Right. And so, you know, as we're talking about sort of a micro level of these things, it's always important too, that we look at kind of the macro issue. And as someone was saying before with the UN resolutions, nothing is narrow, everything is cross-cutting.
Really wonderful. I'm struck so much by what each of you have really talked about and stressed, especially in the Q&A and certainly in your presentations as well, is that so much of this is about empowering people, right? Empowering kids to make decisions for themselves, empowering parents to empower their kids to make those decisions and to feel comfortable and confident in their skills, empowering professionals to build that repertoire of skills to navigate technology in an effective way and to develop relationships with kids and families and their parents. And a lot of that, I think, does come back to the privilege, right, of having the opportunity to go to parent-teacher conferences, right, and to have the time where you're there when your child is home from school before they go to sleep, right? Not all parents have that. And so what are, you know, it really brings us back to, you know, what both of you, I think, have spoken about is how do we as a society want to value parent-child relationships and the family bonds that we enable. And, you know, that's certainly something that I think the vast world can agree on in theoretical. It's when we get to the practical that it becomes really hard for people to make the sacrifices maybe that are necessary to empower that. But I cannot thank you enough. This was such a really wonderful event. We do have 1 minute left. If anyone in our audience would like to ask one short question that hasn't been covered in the chat, I'll do a quick pause. Yeah, really well said there in the chat from Susan. The more we value that relationship, the more we'll value the professionals who work with them. So Karen, Susan, maybe a 30-second just farewell if you have any thoughts or comments, but no pressure if you feel like you've communicated your message.
I would just say, you know, I hear from so many parents who feel like they can't do this because they don't understand enough about social media, and there are resources out there, right? Whether it's, you know, trying to find classes at community centers or libraries, or looking at books, or reading the media and trying to understand what the trends are. But just as we have really tough conversations with kids about so many topics, I just, you know, my message to parents is that we can do this.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you.
And I guess my, I appreciate Kara's doing that. That just opened it up. Then is, you know, in addition to parents finding classes would be to infiltrate the places parents already are with information and about social media and about tech and all of those things, so that, because we know parents are stressed and putting in extra time and finding those classes, which may or may not exist or may not be worth going to, you know, they are going to doctor's offices, and they are on Facebook, and they are taking buses, and all of the, you know, and all of those things. And we certainly can reach out to places parents already are through trusted sources.
Yes, yeah, very important. Great. Well, thank you both again so much. Reminder, our next event is November 14th. We'd love to have you all with us again. And this recording will be posted on our website, and you'll get an email to let you know that it's posted if you are on our listserv. So hopefully you are. Thank you again so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.